Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Honor Feedy. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at NAESP. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's early career webinar on strategies, ideas, and lessons for early career principals to be successful. We've put an outstanding panel together of early career principals. We want to welcome them. Let me give you a little bit of an idea of who they are. With us at the top is Dr. Pharrell Thomas. He is principal at Waterloo Elementary School in Waterloo, South Carolina. Also with us is Dr. Chris Bailey. Chris is the proud principal at Clack Middle School in Abilene, Texas. Also with us is Laura Gotska, principal at Ellis Elementary School in Manassas, Virginia. And lastly, Andrew Lindsay, who is the principal at Ford Line Elementary School in Southgate, Michigan. Many of you know Andy from previous webinars here at NAESP and our assistant principal webinar series. Thank you all for joining our panel today. We are eager to begin. Our first topic of discussion is going to be effective leadership strategies to listen, collaborate, and empower staff members. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Bailey.
Thank you, Ms. Feedy. And let me just first say it's an honor to be here and collaborating with all of you. So I do want to encourage you to use that chat box to enter questions that you might have or thoughts that you have on the topics that we're exploring. So this first one is really about strategies to listen, collaborate, empower staff members. And to start the conversation for all the panelists, I want to talk about really kind of the cornerstone of this conversation is some of the research that the Wallace Foundation has done over the last 2 decades of work that really has been synthesized into a study that came out earlier this year, or I guess last year now, since we're in 2022, about the efficacy of the school principal and the important role that we all play on the campus. I think that we'll all agree that teacher efficacy is the number one indicator of student performance inside and maybe even outside of the classroom. But a very close second is leadership, is principal leadership. And so I want to start by saying that I think no other time in public school history than now is that even more important with where we are with the pandemic. If you're feeling stressed or anxious about kind of where you are in your leadership journey, I want you to know that you're not alone. I am right there with you. This is my second year as a campus principal, 6 years before that as an assistant principal. And it's a tough time to be a leader. And I want to start with that thought that if you're feeling that way, it's okay to feel that way. And I know some of my colleagues here are going to talk about that a little bit more too. And so I encourage you to continue the conversation as we're moving through this webinar and beyond to be sure that you're connecting with people that will support you because, again, second to teachers, the role that we are all doing right now is so important. Throughout this webinar, we're going to kind of break down a little bit of these leadership behaviors and skills that the Wallace research has defined as some of the most contributing factors to leadership success. And so just be listening to those as we go through. So what I want to talk about a little bit is first about really that very front line communication of we just got the job. So you just got the job and now what? You can go to the next slide, Ms. Feedy. I really broke when I got this job, quite frankly, in the middle of a pandemic. I really broke my entry up into 3 phrases, kind of pre-entry where I was still kind of at my previous job and I changed districts. You may or may not do that, and every role is different, but I was still there finishing up that work and starting this one, and then actually being in my new district but not being on campus yet in phase 2, and then actual entry, those first few months when I'm on campus and sharing in the work that's occurring on the campus. And so through that time, you'll see in these 3 phases, the first word that I listed and the first thing to do was to listen. And that's still true even 2 years into this role. I really try to listen more than I speak and listen to a broad range of audiences. very early on, I noticed in my new role that the perception of what was happening within the campus that I'm on now was very different from different stakeholders, from the central office administrators to the campus leadership, to the teachers on campus, the students, even to the parents. The perception of what happened on campus is very different in those groups. So listening and trying to synthesize that information and learning about that was so important to being able to do the work. Once I got my boots on the ground here, starting to put all that information together and say, how is this going to affect the start of school? And again, this happened to be when we were knee deep into the COVID world. And so, one of the things that the Wallace Group says is conversations that are instructionally focused gives us some of our best bang for the buck. But we knew during that time it was really about health and safety too at the same time, wasn't it? So there was a lot of that going on, and then as we actually started school, really kind of monitoring the progress of how we were doing from the beginning, and really picking those few areas that are crucial to our success moving forward. Some of the things that I implemented right away that I saw that maybe were a little bit lacking in the communication here at my campus. You can go to the next slide, Ms. Feedy. I put here. So, and I would encourage you to do this. No matter what meeting happens on our campus, whether that's the administrative team meeting or the instructional leadership team or the foundations team, which is kind of our SEL group, student meetings, PLC meetings, they all have a standard meeting agenda. And that may seem like it's a no-brainer for you. It did for me, but it didn't necessarily for my staff. And once we got to a standard meeting agenda with norms and our goals for each meeting and our mission and our mission for the campus, then we really started focusing our meetings on what we need and what we value as a campus. And so that was kind of fundamental at the beginning. I tried to open up those lines of communication like I talked about through what I call Feedback Friday. So every Friday, I leave my calendar open for teachers to come in and share their thoughts directly with me about the campus, to share their thoughts about maybe what's going on in their own life, how personal life may be affecting their school life. Those things are certainly interchangeable. I mean, not mutually exclusive, right? So having that time where teachers and really all staff can come in and visit directly was very important at the beginning, and even to this day for the last couple of years. Those sessions have been most valuable, really, for me to understand the needs of my staff. And this next thing is something that one of my mentors taught me, very early on. He said, Chris, you got to stay a season ahead, right? So right now we're at the beginning of the semester, but I'm already thinking about what's happening in March and April, and allowing the rest of my administrative team to work in the now, so that we don't get bogged down. We continue to make that progress, and we keep the main thing. And then the last thing in particular on this for communication that I really thought of, again, the same mentor said, there are going to be changes, right? There are going to be things that you need to do up front and early in your tenure, but you can't do it all at once. And so leveraging the great things that were happening, particularly in communication, was very important. I think that a social media presence is important, not just for my own growth and development, but so that we're sharing the great things on my campus. That wasn't present, so that's something I had to put in place. But we did have some other things, like we used the Remind app, and we used some website, district website that was working pretty good. So I leveraged those and built up around that. And so whatever system we're talking about, I would encourage you to leverage that system. So those are some of the things that I found early on in terms of communication. What are some things, panel, that you found early on in your tenure at your first principalship that really kind of set the tone for your leadership?
Well, I think one of the things that I did, and I took over this building in January of last year. So it was in the heart of the pandemic, like you, Chris. And I switched districts and switched schools. And so I was walking into a school where I didn't know very many people. I didn't have those relationships. So one of the first things I did is I set aside time to do one-on-ones with every member of the staff, from the custodians to the cooks, to the paraprofessionals, to the teachers. And I even reached out to some of the parents that I had heard were influential in the building, because one of the things that when you're new to a position is you don't want to, in your effort to shift culture in a positive direction, you don't want to tip over the boat either. So, talking to people and doing what Chris said, listening is a huge part of that transition to becoming a building leader.
And I'm going to just add on to what Andrew said, in that not only did I meet individually with everybody, I actually met with teams, and I listened and I watched. And it might be simple things. What did you love about your team? What would you like to enhance about your team, were the questions I asked. And then I said, something, to the effect of, what would you like to see more of? And the reason I did that is I wanted to see how our PLCs were working, how they were working together as a team. It shared a lot of fun things about the teamwork and how each team worked together. So I think that's critical too, not just individually, but then also making sure you're watching and meeting with your individual teams away from the school building as much as possible to see what's going on.
Yeah, I did the same thing as well. I didn't meet with parents, and that was good. I didn't think about that one, but I did. I think coming in from the summer gave me a chance. I was familiar with the district, in the same district, just had a promotion within the district. But that listening component that Chris talked about throughout each phases, I think that's highly important. You have to be able to listen more and talk less. Lori even said that, you just want to get the feel of what's going on before you make any critical or deep changes into the systems, or find out that you may not have any systems. So listening is definitely a great component.
Hey, and I want to shout out Jennifer Knight. You wrote in there about the S'more weekly newsletter. I use the same app, the same way, weekly newsletter for staff. And I pair that with Canva, by the way, to create the slides for that information. And that is a great tool to use to communicate. Thanks for sharing that.
And then I see Adrian had posted about sending a Parent Sunday update, which is fabulous. So something I do, so if you follow me on Twitter and through Flipgrid, I do a Flipgrid video, because many of my families have limited English proficiency, but they are much better at listening and understanding in English, and same with my students. And so I actually do a Flipgrid video of a weekly update for my families every single week, and I post it on Twitter and Facebook, and I send it home. And so it's a really fun way, and they can respond too. So we have just a lot of fun with that. So it's a great idea. Thank you, Adrian.
And I'll throw out this challenge too. I've talked about some things that were effective. One of the things we really struggled with, and I'm kind of a face-to-face kind of guy anyway, and I like having conversation. But, with COVID, coming in with COVID, our buildings were basically shut down. In Texas, we were mostly here on campus, and I know that's not the same throughout the country, but we didn't have parents in the building, and we didn't, so we had to rethink how we were going to stay engaged with the parent community here at the front of trying to learn. And again, and I came from a different district, so I'm learning what the community values too. I'm curious if any of you had any experience with that at the beginning of your leadership as well.
So I would add to that, I think every community is different, and we are in the sea of information right now. So I think that's a really good point, that each one of our schools, I'm sure Andrew's and Farrell's, your community, and that's why you need to listen with how much information. Am I giving too much? Am I giving not enough? Because it's a constant flow, especially with COVID and so much that is ever changing. And so I'm sure Andrew and Farrell can talk to that. So for mine, it was a delicate balance. So we met once a month just to talk it out. But more than that was overwhelming to our families, versus with my staff, it was more frequent.
Yeah.
So I'm going to highlight something that was said in the chat from Jared. Jared said that he does S'more for staff on Fridays, but he tries for Thursdays. And this is something that I'm going to be touching upon later. is when you're leading a building, you're not just looking out for, the ways to make sure that operationally we run smoothly, but you also have to kind of take into consideration the soft skills, the soft side. And so Jared makes a great point. He tries to send out a staff update on Thursdays to allow them to read it on Fridays. That way it's their weekend. And so respecting their time and to disconnect and to refresh so that they come back on Monday ready to work. I think that is a fabulous point, and it's a practice that I think I'm going to steal. Borrow.
Well, flat out stealing is okay too, I think, Andrew. And I think the same thing. I started mine on Friday and I didn't feel like it was very effective. And the cool thing about S'more, by the way, if you're not using that, is you can track how many people are viewing the newsletter. And I felt like, and I noticed that I wasn't getting much reading it on Friday and some on Monday. And so I switched to Mondays. Early in the morning is when I send mine out. But Thursday may be better too. Jared, I'm curious. If you've had better success on Thursday versus if you've done it on any other time, but I may give that a shot too and try Thursday, because sometimes it's a little rushed for people to be expected to read what's going on in the newsletter on Monday and implement that day. I have felt that strain a little bit. So great idea.
A virtual cup of coffee with parents to stay connected. That was, for all you said, was to meet with parents. That was kind of a brave step. It's a little easier to be brave when you're doing it over virtual. But yeah, virtual cup of coffee chat. I did a virtual open house after I started. Unfortunately, I had like 2 parents show up. All right.
Jennifer talked about also that she does s'mores for parents, which is kind of neat to connect. And a
coffee chat on Facebook Live. That's a brilliant idea.
Isn't it? Okay.
I do Facebook Live every week. Yeah, exactly. Parents love it.
That's great.
Okay, moving on now to our next topic. It's going to be strategies that develop skills in observation, organization, and dealing with tough school situations. Laura, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, guys, welcome. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a fun growing and learning process getting to do this with everybody, all my panelists here. And I'm already learning stuff from from the chat, so keep it coming. I want to see more and more deets. So I wanted to connect sort of this idea of, managing ourselves and our time to the Wallace Foundation. And, some of us have already talked about it a little bit, but I'm a literacy person, so I went into quotations because that's what I do. I didn't put the page number, so I wasn't full on, but I figured if you kind of got a little knee deep in it, the research is really interesting, and I think it's critical for, especially as new principals, because I think it grounds us a little bit. It shows us what we're really doing well and then what we can focus on. So for people, something I'm going to kind of dive into is in the Wallace Foundation, they talk about focusing on 3 components highlighted: the caring, communication, and building trust. So we saw that communication. We're going to see a bit more of it here in a new way, and that caring and building trust, and kind of how you do that with systems and processes. Then organizational management. A lot of what I'm going to show you guys has to do with managing that organizational management in your building to make you functional and running through every day. So you really need those skills to manage a complex organization. So as a perspective today, as we're going through the day of what did Gazda do, I had 22% of my students out yesterday for a variety of reasons. We had ICE, we had COVID, we had, regular absences, kids out of the country, you name it. Doing, for many of us, the contact tracing with COVID. We had some behavior issues, staff meetings, all of it. That's a normal day. That's how we roll. So just kind of being able to manage that and going through what we're doing. Then going to managing personal and personnel resources. Some scarce resources that principals manage strategically that are intangible are time. So I think that's what I'm going to hopefully help you all with, is how to manage your time in a tangible way to be successful. Because I don't know about you all, but time escapes me rather rapidly. And then engaging instructionally focused interactions. So I'm going to teach you ways that you can do this by managing your time and organizing things in your building. All right, next. So now here we go. So I'm going to give some stories, kind of get into some details as we go through here. All right, so looking at this, what can you control? So this is the beautiful chaos. What I love about being a principal, which I never thought I was going to be a principal. I was a teacher for 17 years, so here I am. I blame my fellow leaders who pushed me in this direction, and now I love it, so it's their fault. But what can I control? and this is critical because this is what's going to give you time. You know, a day escape. So today I had a discipline issue that took 90% of my day. But because I had so much other things, processes in place, that I knew other things were rolling and that I was successful and good to go. So for example, let's say I took the role on in July of 2020 in the midst of the start of the pandemic. And, you know, I really needed to get processes in place so that we could be as productive and as effective as we were. So something I control is that in most districts or schools, you have an observation planning process, right? You have dates, you have expectations of what, is it informal, is it formal? You may decide you're going to focus on this in October, this in December. But if you create that and know who, when, where, and get that all under control and plan and process and support your assistant principal and anybody else, including your staff on that, you're not going to be in the 11th hour going, I didn't observe by this time, or now this teacher maybe needs some more support, because you have made that process as you're going through and you're planning that. So I'd love to see examples. I think observation planning and processes can look a lot different. So please post any of those that you have in the chat and I'll share some of mine as well, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's communication from emails, etc. So I would love to see what else anybody else does as you're going through that observation planning and processes. And I'm not just speaking to here about the timelines, which are important as well, but you need to look ahead, just like Chris said. You need to look ahead that next season. So what are mid-years going to look like? How are evaluations going to be written? How do you want these to look? What do you want that communication to be? How often do you meet? So kind of those things are really kind of critical as you're going through and creating, because you have to think, what's your goal in that year? And I have a theme every year. So ours is designing our future this year. So when I'm in my classrooms and doing these observations, everybody knows what our design of our future that we're focusing on in that lesson. All right. So then next, looking at organization, school-wide and personal calendars. I can't stress enough that if it's not on the calendar, I always tell people, if you didn't put it on the calendar, it doesn't exist. It's never going to happen for me. I won't be there. I won't know. And make sure you share your personal calendar as well. So I have a personal calendar and then we have the main calendar. It's no secret where I am and what's going on, but you can start your calendars from day one. So things to think about. So for a school-wide calendar, I know many people have them and like them on their boards in their hallways. I do not like them. And I don't like them because we're all COVID principals. And right, so in our district, we're called PPs, the Pandemic Principal Group. So for all my PPs out there, woo, woo, which is all of us, you're rocking. Well, what happens is when you have to, either because of weather or because of COVID, all have to go virtual, those boards don't work very well. And so we really had to shift our thinking. I had already done this because I love things online and I was a paperless teacher for many, many years. But with that, and I'm going to shout out, I have lots of people posting. I love it. So with that, in looking at sort of that organization is having an online calendar with whether you're using Google, whether you're using Outlook, whatever works for you, make sure it's there and visible and that everybody knows how to access it, which was a challenge at my school. We had to learn how to do that. So real fast, we're going to run back to observation. I see Nathan posted about feedback to teachers, all goes in the spreadsheet so I can easily access key details for end of year use. All right, you're a rock star, Nathan, so you need to tell us more how you have the time to do that because I'm not quite there yet. I store it all in my brain and hope I remember forever and ever. We have forums, right, and we have a whole online system for it, but I rely a little too heavily on my memory. All right, very, very nice. And so then the next thing, coming back to our fabulous Calendly, somebody had said for scheduling their observations. And then in addition, utilize your admin secretary to run your calendar. Game changer. That's awesome. We don't have admin secretaries really for us in my district at the elementary level. So, finding somebody who can be your buddy to look at that is fantastic. All right, next, again, so plan it all out. So again, you already know when school's here and school's not there. So if you look, how are you going to help to control that beautiful chaos? You'll see to the right, Laura, Lee, and Tanya, that's my admin team. That's how we structure for our formals versus informals. Everything that you see shaded gray is all the ones that don't need that extra informal or formal according to the calendar. You'll look over with the vertical pacing and vertical alignment. Again, calendar, you'll see on there the quarters and then the date. So everybody knows when this is, what's happening. Again, planning, because you already have that information. So getting it in all the spaces so it's in everybody's face that you know as you're going through it. All right, if we can go back one, that would be great. And because I just want to do number 3, the last one is dealing with tough conversations. So go ahead and go back to the next slide, and then I'll show you just some examples. The critical thing, once you get organized, once you've been communicating and once you've been listening, what you're going to realize when you start to get organized is certain friends are going to come visit you. And those friends, I want to stress to every principal, a principal shared this with me, is you need to beware. When you're starting to have those conversations and you're planning, the people who come to you first and have the most needs are somebody who wants to, not necessarily, but may want to control the situation or demand your time in a way that may not be appropriate, and it's all about them and not maybe on kids and on the rest of the staff. It may not always be the case, but you need to be very, very aware, and you may need to have more important conversations with them as they go through in order to control the chaos. Because when somebody else is trying to control that, that can be detrimental to your culture and your positive vibes that are going on in your building. So I highly recommend, if you've never taken professional cognitive coaching, it's the very best, as well as the book Fierce Conversations about how to have that. So again, I just can't, and I appreciate Jared saying that as we go through, right? We don't want to got you, Carla says, or gotcha, we've got you. But again, you need to know those conversations and those cognitive coaching skills to be able to manage all these sort of pieces. Go ahead next. And then just some other examples as we go through, and I can tell you all about how to find professional cognitive coaching training. So some other examples, and I'm happy to share all of them. Some stuff I have to delete. If you run PLCs and CLTs in your building, having, like we talked about, a common guide that everybody uses and for an agenda, all of my stuff, every team, we have our main teams page, and then everything's housed in there. And so everything is visible. So we have transparency, which was needed at my school. So everybody can find it, whether they want to or not. It's there. You'll skip over and there's the calendar. You'll see, if you were to scroll and see all of my calendars, I got a lot of calendars between myself and everybody else's that I share, just so that we can all keep organized. And again, we add and have it all throughout the whole year. Above that, now that we are in this virtual world, whether you're in virtual, we're in person, but you never know when we flip and what's going to happen. So we have our Canvas page. That's a community. I run it with my technology coach, and we have all sorts of fun things there. And then as you go to the final, make sure you're scheduling like crazy, because your schedules are your best friend. Don't forget, I love this from Benjamin Franklin, for every minute spent organizing is an hour earned, and I cannot stress that enough. So I'm going to stop, and I want to kind of allow my panel to share theirs, because I know they have wonderful ideas.
I'm going to go back to that comment that that Carla Beek made about the "I got you" philosophy versus the "gotcha" philosophy. You know, especially on a new campus, or as a new administrator on campus, I think it's so important that staff know that you assume good intentions in all the work that you're doing. And a simple thing as inviting them to what's on your calendar whenever you're going to be in their campus is so supportive. That doesn't mean that you can't go in at any time, of course, but that just feels so supportive that you took that extra step to invite them and let them know, hey, I got you, I got your back, and I want you to be successful. And when we need some coaching on that, we'll work through the coaching component of it well before there's any kind of evaluative component of it. So great thought, Carla.
I had a situation happen today where I was meeting with a teacher after an observation, and she spent about three and a half minutes on a transition, and it just felt long. And so when we were sitting down, I said, okay, so I do have some coaching ideas. And I said, I want you to understand right now, we're talking, this is coaching. This is not criticism, but this is just an area that you might want to look at. I noticed that your transition from one activity to another went a little long. And here are some ways to possibly, redo that so that you use your time a little bit better. And you got to use words that are not judgmental. Like I was saying, you got to hear my heart on this. It's just coaching. You're doing a fabulous job. But if I don't point out some area of growth, then I'm not doing my job either. Because we're all in it to get better.
Great. Okay.
And I was going to throw, speaking of, with Natalie's Calendly and everybody who's posting that, and Kim and a bunch of people from Calendly, that's a prime example that feedback, has this bad rap of being negative. And all of these foundations of organization help you to provide feedback and all be on the same page. So when you guys are posting these amazing ideas, it's amazing feedback, right? And coaching for all of us to be our very best. So thank you. It's a great idea.
Okay. Moving on to our next topic on how to use the power of networking and collaboration with other principal colleagues. And I will turn it over to Pharrell.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Again, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I think Chris said that earlier, and to sit and get from other professionals, and basically this is what we're doing. We're networking and collaborating with one another. You can go to the next slide there, Anna. So when looking at the Wallace Foundation's work and the report, they did a report on effective school leadership and the 5 keys, and we kind of talked about that: shaping a vision of academic success, creating a climate of hospitable to learning, cultivating leadership, improving instruction, managing people, data, processes, and all that to foster school improvement. All of that comes in play when you're networking and collaborating with other principals. And so looking at things such as affinity groups, professional organizations, what I like to term as SEL, which is strategy, shared educational leadership strategies. And then social media, those things all together help you to be an effective leader, because you can't do this by yourself. It's no different from being in the classroom that good teachers borrow, steal, whatever term we want to use from other teachers. So we want to do that. The same thing's going to take place when you're in a principal. Next slide. All right. So in the Affinity Group, I want to talk about Affinity Group a little bit. So this picture here is me with some other guys. I'm in an Affinity Group with 10 other administrators or educational leaders, and we're called Bold Leadership Consultants. And what Bold has done for me is it's provided me a safe space to share my frustrations and bounce ideas off and just different perspectives of real situations. If you look at this picture, you see all these guys, we all look alike. We share that. We're African American male leaders, which make up 11% of school administrators. And sometimes, so your affinity groups could be people that look like you, people that may share the same, like I'm a principal of a rural school. So meeting and communicating with other principals who are in rural schools in different states. How do you lead your school in that regards? Or you could be Hispanic, you could be female, you could whatever. I mean, your affinity group is just like-minded people sharing some of the same experiences. And so together as a group, we have about 70 years of experience as principals. So there's some who are brand new, like this is my second year, there's another guy the second year, and there's one guy who's been a principal for 12 years. And 10 years. And so each one teach one. So we learn from those who are new and even from those who have been experienced. So if you're curious or want to create your own affinity group with some others that's like-minded as yourself in your role as principal, there's a link that I put here from a journal that gives the 3 characteristics of setting up a good affinity group. If you can go to the next slide there, Ms. Anna. All right. And so joining local, state, and national organizations, I can say that NAESP was a great experience for me going to the conference last year. I mean, it was the 100th anniversary. It was a great place to meet other principals and other administrators. And I mean, you talk about a wealth of knowledge and ideas. Each session I went to was just, I felt like a sponge, soaking up the information from there. And then I'm in South Carolina. So in South Carolina, we have SCASA, which is our Association of School Administrators. I've presented at SCASA before. I'm presenting again this year on using social media to effectively bring your school. And so going into local and state organizations help you to meet other people, help you get some collaboration. The network is great. As a matter of fact, on here is Miss Sonia Robinson. Ms. Robinson is in the neighboring district to me. I met Ms. Robinson at a conference this weekend. She's a assistant principal, aspiring to be the principal one day. I think she's going to do an amazing job at her school. But this is where you get tons of information and you meet a wealth of people with experience and different ideas. You can go to the next one. And so this is what we talk about social and emotional learning. So that's what we know SEL to be. But I want to brand that also as being shared educational leadership strategies. And so that's getting resources, practice, professional development. And so here is an example of what says the 12 days of Clifton Clyde Christmas 2021. Well, I got this from a principal who I met in Chicago at the national conference, and he shared this with me, and I was trying to do something different for my school. We shut down last Christmas in the middle of the pandemic because frankly half my staff had COVID, and so we had not enough adults to do to be in the building last December. So this December, this past, I wanted to create a culture and excitement about us Christmas, so the 12 days prior to Christmas. So I changed this information, put it based on our school, name, and we did that. And if you look down here at the bottom, there's a minute of meetings. One of my friends that's in bold leadership with me, Dr. Carlos Grant, principal of Wayhampton High School, he put in a text group with us one morning. Hey, who wants to share their agenda for their leadership team on when we got back from the Christmas break, from the winter break? And so I took some information from this and kind of used it and tweaked it. Had the two greatest meetings I've had probably in the past 2 years. We were on topic, we were on time, we got done as we said we would. And so it helped me, it helped us keep our meeting aligned. And so using just resources and sharing with other principals and having that collaboration is great, because you get information from people who's done things and who's tried them, who's found the hiccups, and you kind of spin that to your own benefit, to your own use. But it's great practices. All right, next slide. Social media is another great component. Twitter talks, Twitter chats, just different groups and people that can follow on Twitter. I follow a lot of people that I met this summer at the national conference for NASCP. I read their tweets and just follow some of the things they say. LinkedIn, I happened to meet a superintendent in California. Joined a book reading that they were doing for her district and was able to share. They asked me to share the last chapter, to lead that last chapter. And so met some great people doing that. Podcast. I've been a host of a podcast. I've been invited to podcasts from LinkedIn. I actually met another guy and got his book, was on his podcast. Great way of sharing information and reading information. And again, ESP's Twitter page is great information is on there all the time. All right, next one, I think that is it. So I got a question for the group. So in the audience, how do you network and collaborate with other principals, assistant principals, and administrators? And what are some ways that you found successful? What are some things that you are doing that we could hear and learn from? Any of the guys that's on the panel too would like to share too some of the things that you've done too. And Laura, we met in Chicago.
We did. We hung out. We did.
That's
we were
right.
lucky. One thing I would say is it can be lonely at the top. And I have shifted over. When I was a teacher in the building, I became a teacher on special assignment to being an administrator. And then now I'm in my own building. And it's not because anybody intends it, but you shift into an evaluative role, even if that's, and so it's even your APs. I love my APs, but I'm still their principal, right? So as much as close as we are, and we're really, really close, there's still always that layer. So I just can't stress enough with Pharrell, with all of this, finding like-minded and other principals and being able to connect and share stories. It's so important, and it just reminds you you're not alone and we're all in it together. And especially like being like with this, where we're all in different corners of the world or the United States like today, it's really cool to learn from each of you and how it's done in your district and your school, because it's different. And so it helps me have a new perspective.
So to build on something that Pharrell was saying, and this kind of, I want to dovetail this with Natalie's question about how do you network with an affinity group and where can you find one? Facebook principal groups are a treasure trove of information. And it's not just the conversations that happen between principals. Like if you have a problem, you put it out there and you get a bunch of people's ideas on how to fix the problem. And then you can be inspired by an idea. But a lot of these Facebook groups also have a files little section of the Facebook group. And that is a treasure in and of itself. If you want to see a calendar or a schedule that you've been thinking about, you can go in there. If you need a letter to talk about a COVID exposure, it's in there. There are so many different types of resources that are in a Facebook, or especially with principal groups. As far as a specific affinity groups, you know, until I met Pharrell, I'd never even really heard of an affinity group. But I can tell you right now that I kind of had one with a couple of principals up here in Michigan, because we talk amongst each other. We're kind of tech nerds, so we talk about ways that we can use technology in being an administrator. So there is that common purpose. I just didn't call it an affinity group, but now I have a name for it. So thank you, Pharrell.
And that's it. And that's exactly right. So we have, anybody heard of Marco Polo? It's a app that we do that every morning. We do a text group. You're exactly right. And again, that affinity group is based on that commonality that you share. You guys are educational leaders. You're in tech, and and that's an affinity group. Exactly right.
I'll add just real quick to say, you know, finding or having that group with people that maybe aren't connected to the daily work that you're doing sometimes can be cathartic. You know, I have my people, my people are Carla and Lauren, who I can call any day, anytime, ask the dumbest questions. They probably think they're dumb because maybe sometimes they are, but I have no shame. And they do the same thing. Not that their questions are ever dumb, because they're not. But they're not connected to the daily work I do in my district. They're in a different district. And they're people that I can commiserate with or celebrate with at any point, any time. Without kind of feeling that pressure of who else might be connected in a way that, that may be difficult to have a conversation, a real authentic conversation with. But I'll say this, just to wrap up my thought, is no matter what your affinity group is, get with people who maybe look different than you, that have different thoughts, that are going to challenge your thinking, that are going to really provide some thought-provoking conversation, and most importantly, people that you will dialogue with, because that's how we get better, I feel, is to find people who maybe don't look, sound, or act like us as well, to challenge our thought process and the work that we're doing.
Right.
Chris, I couldn't. That is such an awesome. One of my best friends in education is Aquatic Jones, a principal in Delaware, and I have never met her in person. We've only interacted online. We've talked to each other on the phone. We've sent messages, but we've really, and she's an African-American woman in Delaware. I'm a white dude in Michigan, and that connection has been beautiful and valuable.
I would just go,
go
I totally agree. And then with that also, so I have a very large district. And again, like, Kim was saying, moving up kind of within it, which I've been very fortunate to do. And I have, just love where I work and my leadership teams and everybody who's been here. But, I was the new kid on the block, and nobody had been new for a very long time. So that was really awkward to be like the one new principal or the one of two new principals, and everybody else had been doing it for 10 years. And so then with my affinity group, I ended up finding people, again, like-minded, who I knew kind of on the peripheral, because I wasn't that cool yet, I wasn't a principal, who took me in really kind of and loved me and helped me understand things in my district, even within my, that I could ask questions to, that I could always go to, like, is this normal? Am I doing this right? What are you hearing? Like, what are you seeing? And they've been just such a lifeboat, and so positive and wonderful. And so it's also nice to have somebody within your space, like, oh, did I mess that up? No, you're great. Okay. I don't know. So I also encourage within too, because it helps you connect again within your own school community and your district.
Awesome. I hate to put her on the spot, but I'd like to introduce Dr. Gracie Branch, our Associate Executive Director for Educational Leadership at NAESP. And Gracie, tell us about the networking opportunities at NAESP for Affinity Groups.
Well, we have several things that we've started this year. I think all of our NAESP centers for advancing leadership are trying to reach out and connect with our members. Our middle level group have middle level meetups. That's open to all of our middle level members. They're using Canvas as a kind of resource depository for the work and to set up that professional learning community for middle level educators. This year, we also started mastermind groups. We have 2 groups, one running on Tuesday night and one running on Wednesday night. We have 2 of our fellows, Andrea Thompson and Jessica Cabine, that are each facilitating the mastermind group. And those are really kind of smaller, intimate interactions. They meet monthly, I believe, at least monthly or 2 times a month. So a lot of mentoring and coaching is going on in those groups. And I'm trying to think, we have a lot of Twitter chats going on, but also we've got in our Women for Leadership book study group, we've been using Clubhouse, which is another way to network that I just was not as familiar with. But I really love it that I can go to my book study group. I don't have to be on camera. You can be driving and you can have conversations in one of the Clubhouse rooms. So I don't know if you've used that, but I'll just throw that idea out. But that's, I guess, the great thing about technology. There are multiple ways to network, but I think I love the point about the affinity groups, that you're really looking for like-minded people and that those groups can be as diverse as they can be for us. And we're just learning from a lot of different people in those groups. So those are just a few things we're doing at NAESP to form networks and communities of practice.
Thank you. Okay, our last topic, most important, is ideas for personal growth and self-care that principals need. And I'll turn it over to you, Andy.
All right, I am very enthusiastic about this because for a lot of reasons. You can switch to the next slide. Earlier in the webinar, Nathan Walker made a comment about cutting corners. And in order to effectively do our job, because there is so much on our plates, we have to know when and where to cut corners. It's okay to cut corners. We just have to do it strategically. And so part of what I want to talk about are not only ways to cut corners, but also you have to know yourself before you can cut those corners. And so I'm kind of dividing into two areas, kind of self-awareness and self-management, okay? And so when we talk about self-awareness, we need to understand what it is about ourselves that is going to help us be successful. And I kind of want to look at all this through a COVID lens, because that's what's impacting us right now. And I don't know about you all, but I am so tired at the end of every day now, and it's a different kind of tired. And so I have, for the last year or so, I have been very intentional about getting about 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep a night. And I know that for many of us, that's just like next to impossible. but in order for me to make that work, I have to give up certain things. And so one of the things that I've given up is I don't bring my paperwork work home. I'll answer an email. I'll make a phone call from home. But one of my demands on myself is when I leave my office, I leave my office. And it's hard to do because there's so much there. But we have to be able to, like Laura said earlier, we have to manage our time effectively, and we have to use tools to do so, because life is there, and it's not just our work life. One of the things I learned early in my career from a teacher, where I sat and covered a class, and he had a desk with glass on his desk, and he had pictures of himself and his family all over the world. And in the middle of it, he said, never confuse having a life or having a career for having a life. And because we only, we got to make sure that we give our time and our attention to where life demands it, and it's not work. Work is the way we live life. Work cannot be our life, and it's setting those boundaries. Being in tune to your own spiritual foundations. For me, I have a faith in Jesus as a Christian, but I respect other people's faith and how they connect spiritually as well, because that spiritual connection also gives you a moral foundation and a moral focus, so that it's not just necessarily about you. It's about how to live your life in accordance to values that you ascribe to. So I urge people, just find that spiritual connection in whatever faith that you find fits you as a person, because COVID affects everybody differently. It seems to attack people that in very random ways. In some ways, some people get over it very quickly. Some people die. And there's no rhyme or reason. I had a friend that was in his 40s, healthy, non-smoker, exercised, died of COVID. And that could have been me. And there's no rhyme or reason for it. So sometimes those spiritual foundations really help provide that foundation of support. Another way of knowing yourself is to be aware of your own personality. And in one of the pictures on here, I have Myers-Briggs. And so if you're aware of who you are and your tendencies, you can play to your strengths, which is my next bullet point. There's a book called The Strengths Finder. It's the Clifton Strengths Finder. Understand that if you spend all of your time as an administrator playing to your weaknesses, you will end up exhausted. You will end up burned out. So know your strengths and play to your strengths. Delegate your weaknesses, if at all possible. The next is values, core values. I am so big on core values. And I want my building to be known by the value of kindness. And so everything we do comes back to kindness. We have other core values, leadership, teamwork, but our core value of kindness is so critical here. And I just want it to ooze through this building. And that's part of our mission and vision. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then finally, once you know yourself, you have to be able to manage yourself. And so much of this we've already touched upon earlier. We've touched upon, Laura talked about ways to control or manage your time. Chris and Laura talked about productivity. But I also want to talk about that on a kind of a know yourself way, to be able to control your emotions. Emotional control in your job is so important, because you have to understand that as the principal, you set the timetable. I had an upset parent call because their child, their third grade child, got into their locker, got on their cell phone, said a kid punched him on the playground today. And so that parent's irate, the child's screaming. And I'm like, and so I just calmly talked to the child with the parent listening in. But then I said, I will get back to you with the next steps. It's on my timetable, not the parents, because I know that in that moment, there's a lot of emotions going on. And so I want to make sure that we are doing what we can to control the emotional feel of that moment. Self-discipline is that, like, for me, it's leaving stuff at work and knowing it's not going to get touched until the next day. I have so much work to do in the area of evaluations right now. But you know something, most of my teachers are very, very good. And I know that already about them. So I will get to the paperwork part of that when I get to it. I've had the conversations. They know where they stand. Eventually, I will find time to get to the paperwork. One of the things that have impacted me most is I read a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And in it, he says that you can choose your attitude in any situation. And so I encourage you all to, even when you are feeling that tired, when you're feeling discouraged, being able to tap into being able to control your attitude. And a lot of times having that kind of control means that you have to forgive because things happen for no reason, it feels like, and they hurt. People get mad at you. They say things to you that are off base. You know they're off base, but forgive them. Forgiveness is not for them. It's for you to be able to move on. And so the question is, and I know I kind of got away from the COVID lens on this side, but how do you manage when the COVID chaos strikes your school? How do you manage your time when all of a sudden you have to contact trace? How do you control your emotions when you have staff that are out, that are on quarantine, that have tested positive, you're scared for them? How do you do all of that? I'd be interested in your thoughts in the chat here. We have about 3 minutes left in this in the webinar here, and I know we wanted to kind of bring everything back. Next slide. To going back to the Wallace Foundation's research on what drives principals' contributions. What are those things that really affect schools' outcomes? Because how we do our leadership impacts the school outcomes. And so when we look at those 4 bullet points, that we have to engage in structurally focused interactions with staff, we have to build a productive school climate. That means that we're talking to teachers, we're listening to teachers, not just about school, but about life, facilitating productive collaboration in professional learning communities, and finally managing personnel and resources strategically. What does that look like? And in particular, in the last couple of minutes here, what does that look like in a COVID world? I'm really interested in your thoughts. Panelists, do you have any thoughts on what I just said?
Well, when you said COVID world, yesterday was COVID hot for me. My nurse is out with COVID. I have double-digit staff out with COVID, and we had 22% of the student population out yesterday. So it was one of those days in which I just looked at my team. I said, we got this. We laughed a lot, and we divided and conquered, and I spent my entire day contact tracing and doing COVID. And you know what? That's okay. And then I reminded them all that we have this amazing nurse, and I have not had to do it since August because I didn't have a nurse in August. And so I've had that gift of time, and now it's our time to step up for her, and we're going to laugh along the way and take care of everybody. And I had a lot of fun conversations with families. I had a lot of meaningful conversations with families about how they're doing and how we could support them. And so I think a sense of humor, a plan, and doing it together, and just sometimes you just got to get knee deep.
And I'll just say real quick, Andrew, I know that Dr. Branch is gonna wrap this up real quick, but I just want to give this encouragement to people on this thing. You are enough for the work that you're doing. You are more than enough for the support that you're giving your kids and your teachers and your staff. So know that in the work that you're doing. And when you need support, rely on the people around you. And if there's a way that I can be of assistance to you anytime, please reach out. I'm always a phone call, text message, direct message away. But most importantly, I want you to know that you're enough for what your staff needs.
Great. And we're all in it together. So just, if you want to laugh, do anything, join us.
So again, you can reach out to each of our panelists. Their emails are included in this PowerPoint presentation, so feel free to do that. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Branch.
Just want to thank you all. I'm sorry I joined late. I had a networking meeting that I had to be a part of. You all did a tremendous job and made so many great points. And Chris, when you were writing all the different jobs, I think that's the big thing for COVID. You all are doing jobs that you never anticipated in your careers, like contact tracing, that you would ever have to do. And I just have so much admiration for the jobs that you're doing in the building and the information that you shared today. And you all can come back anytime and do a webinar for us. So thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. and we appreciate everybody being here today.